What do you do when the life you built from nothing crumbles the moment you return home? When the woman you trusted becomes a stranger, and the child you fought for calls another man father? In a bustling city in West Africa, a man named Daniel stepped off a plane after 7 long years abroad. He carried gifts, money, and dreams of reunion. But waiting for him wasn't celebration, it was betrayal wrapped in silence and smiles. He had sent money every month. He had called when he could. He had believed love could survive distance. But belief doesn't always protect you from the truth. This isn't just a story about a man who left and came back. It's a story about sacrifice, trust, and the invisible cost of chasing a better life for the ones you love. Before he became a headline in his own tragedy, there was Daniel. A husband. A father. A dreamer. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it morning in Accra, evening in Johannesburg, or midnight in New York? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about what it cost him to find out. Daniel stood at the door of his small apartment in Lagos, his wife Grace in front of him with tears streaming down her face. In her arms, their son Emmanuel, barely 2 years old, reached tiny hands toward his father, not understanding why daddy was leaving. Daniel kissed the boy's forehead, then Grace's lips, tasting salt and sorrow. 7 years, he whispered. Maybe less. I'll send money every month. I'll call when I can. And when I come back, we'll have everything we dreamed of, a house, a car, Emmanuel's school fees paid through university. Grace nodded, but her eyes held something Daniel couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Or doubt. He chose to believe it was just sadness. He had to believe that. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to board that plane to Malaysia, where a construction job waited, a job that paid in 1 month what he'd earn in 6 months in Nigeria. He kissed Emmanuel one more time, memorizing the baby smell of his skin, the soft curls on his head. Then he walked out the door, carrying nothing but a single bag and a heart heavy with hope. The first year was the hardest. Daniel worked 12-hour shift under the scorching Malaysian sun, lifting steel beams and mixing concrete until his hands bled and his back screamed. But every night, he would lie on his narrow bed in the cramped dormitory he shared with 5 other men, and he would think of Grace and Emmanuel. He would imagine his son's first steps, his first words. He would picture Grace teaching the boy to say, "Daddy," pointing to Daniel's photo on the wall. And it gave him strength. Every month, without fail, Daniel sent money home. Not just enough for food and rent, he sent extra. For Emmanuel's clothes. For Grace's hair. For small joys he couldn't be there to provide in person. And Grace would call him, her voice crackling through the cheap phone connection, telling him thank you, telling him Emmanuel was growing so fast, telling him she missed him. "I miss you too," Daniel would say. And he meant it with every fiber of his being. But missing someone and being there are not the same thing. By the 3rd year, the phone calls became shorter. Grace said Emmanuel was busy with nursery school. She said the network was bad. She said she'd call back later, but sometimes later turned into days, then weeks. Daniel told himself it was normal. Life moved on. People got busy. He threw himself deeper into work, taking extra shifts, saving more money. He sent gifts through friends traveling home, toys for Emmanuel, jewelry for Grace, fabric for her business. And when Grace thanked him through text messages instead of calls, he told himself it was fine. She was probably just tired. Raising a child alone wasn't easy. He understood. He had to understand. Because the alternative, that something was wrong, that the distance was creating a gap too wide to cross, was too painful to consider. So he worked harder. Sent more money. And convinced himself that love, real love, could survive anything. The fourth and fifth years bled together in a haze of concrete dust and wire transfers. Daniel barely slept. He barely ate. He became a machine designed for one purpose, earning money to build a future for his family. His coworkers called him the ghost because he never went out, never drank, never spent money on anything except phone credit and remittances home. "You're killing yourself," his friend Joseph told him one night. "When was the last time you even spoke to your wife?" Daniel stared at his phone. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since he'd heard Grace's voice. But she'd sent a text yesterday, "Emmanuel is fine. Thank you for the money. See." Daniel showed Joseph the message. "Everything's fine." But Joseph just shook his head sadly, and Daniel turned away before his friend could see the doubt creeping into his own eyes. That night, Daniel lay awake and made a decision. He would stay 2 more years, just 2 more, and then he'd go home. He'd have enough money by then. Enough to start a business. Enough to never leave again. 2 more years became 3 when the company offered him a supervisor position with double the salary. Daniel hesitated, but then he thought of the house he could buy with the extra money. A real house with a yard where Emmanuel could play. So he said yes. He called Grace to tell her the good news. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice distant, distracted. "That's wonderful, Daniel." "Really? I have to go, Emmanuel needs me." And she hung up before he could say he loved her. Daniel stared at his phone for a long time that night, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. But he pushed it away. Just 2 more years. He'd come home in 2 more years, and everything would be perfect. He had to believe that. Because if he didn't, then what had the last 7 years been for? What had he sacrificed everything for, if not for the family waiting for him at home? So Daniel closed his eyes and dreamed of reunion, of Emmanuel running into his arms, of Grace smiling the way she used to. He dreamed of home. And he ignored the small voice in his head whispering that home might not be waiting for him anymore. Daniel's hands shook as the plane touched down in Lagos. 7 years. 7 long years of exile, and now he was home. He'd sent a message to Grace 2 days ago, "Coming home Friday. Don't tell Emmanuel, I want to surprise him." She'd replied with a simple, "Okay." Not "I can't wait." Not "we've missed you so much." Just "okay." But Daniel pushed the unease aside as he collected his bags, 3 large suitcases filled with gifts, electronics, clothes, everything he dreamed of bringing home. He changed too. His body was harder now, leaner. His hands were calloused and scarred. But his heart was full. He was home. The taxi ride to his old neighborhood felt surreal. Everything looked different, new buildings, new roads, new shops. 7 years was a lifetime in a city like Lagos. When the taxi finally stopped in front of his apartment building, Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He paid the driver, grabbed his bags, and climbed the familiar stairs, each step feeling like walking through a dream. He reached his door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. Daniel frowned and tried the handle, unlocked. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was different. New furniture. New curtains. A flat-screen TV on the wall. And toys, so many toys scattered across the floor. His son's toys. "Grace." Daniel called out. "Emmanuel." Silence. Then, footsteps from the bedroom. The door opened, and Grace appeared. Daniel's breath caught. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he remembered. Her hair was styled in expensive braids. Her clothes looked new, fashionable. She stared at him like he was a ghost. "Daniel," she whispered. "Surprise," he said, smiling, waiting for her to run to him, to throw her arms around him. But she didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked terrifyingly like fear. "Where's Emmanuel?" Daniel asked, looking around. "I want to see my son." Before Grace could answer, the apartment door opened behind Daniel. He turned and froze. A man walked in, carrying grocery bags, laughing at something, calling out, "Grace, I got the..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Daniel. The man was tall, well-dressed, confident. He looked at Daniel with confusion, then at Grace with something else. Recognition. Guilt. "Who is this?" the man asked. Daniel's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Who are you?" Grace opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. And then Daniel heard it, a small voice from the bedroom. "Uncle Victor, did you get my chocolate?" A little boy ran out, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and crashed into the man's legs, hugging him. The man, Victor, touched the boy's head absently, his eyes still on Daniel. And Daniel looked at the boy. His son. Emmanuel. 7 years old now. Tall and bright-eyed and beautiful. Emmanuel looked up at Daniel with polite curiosity. "Who's that, Uncle Victor?" Daniel's world shattered. His son, his own son, didn't know him. "Emmanuel," Daniel whispered, dropping to his knees. "Emmanuel, it's me. It's Daddy." The boy blinked. "Daddy." He looked at Grace, then at Victor, confused. Grace stepped forward, her hands shaking. "Daniel, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Daniel roared, rising to his feet. "Explain why another man is in my house. Explain why my son doesn't know who I am." Victor set down the grocery bags carefully, his jaw tight. "Maybe you should leave," he said to Daniel. Daniel laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Viv. Viv. This is my home. That's my wife. That's my son." "Not anymore," Victor said quietly. And those 3 words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered back, staring at Grace. "Tell me he's lying," Daniel pleaded. "Grace, please. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Tears poured down Grace's face now. "You were gone, Daniel. You were gone for 7 years. Emmanuel was 2 when you left. He doesn't remember you. He only knows Victor. Victor's been here. Victor's been the one helping us, taking care of us, with my money." Daniel shouted. "Every month, I sent money. I worked myself to death for you. Money isn't enough." Grace screamed back, her voice breaking. "Money doesn't hold your child when he's sick. Money doesn't show up at school meetings. Money doesn't teach him to ride a bike or help with homework or tuck him in at night. Victor did all of that. Victor was here." Daniel felt his knees buckle. He reached for the wall to steady himself. Emmanuel, his little Emmanuel, had hidden behind Victor's legs now, frightened by the shouting. His son was afraid of him. His own son was afraid of him. "How long?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Grace looked at the floor. 3 years. 3 years. Half of the time Daniel had been gone. He'd been killing himself in Malaysia, dreaming of coming home, while another man took his place. While another man raised his son. While another man slept in his bed. Daniel looked at Victor, really looked at him. And he saw the guilt there, yes. But also defiance. Victor wasn't sorry. He'd chosen this. Grace had chosen this. And Daniel had been erased. Replaced. Forgotten. "Get out," Victor said again, softer this time. Almost pitiful. "Please. You're scaring Emmanuel." Daniel looked at his son one more time. Emmanuel's small hand clutched Victor's pants. His eyes were wide with fear of Daniel. Of his own father. Something inside Daniel broke beyond repair. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving his suitcases behind. Leaving everything behind. He walked down the stairs in a daze, his mind blank, his chest hollow. He'd given 7 years of his life for this. 7 years of blood and sweat and loneliness. And for what? To come home to strangers wearing familiar faces. To discover that sacrifice isn't always rewarded. That love doesn't always wait. That some distances are too far to cross, even when you finally come home. Daniel reached the street and kept walking, not knowing where he was going. Not caring. Behind him, in the apartment, he heard Emmanuel's small voice asking, "Who was that man, Mommy?" And Grace's broken answer, "Nobody, baby. Nobody." Daniel spent that first night on a friend's couch, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Joseph, his old friend from the neighborhood, had taken him in without questions, just a sad shake of his head that said he'd seen this story before. Too many men went abroad chasing dreams and came home to nightmares. But knowing he wasn't alone in his pain didn't make it hurt less. When morning came, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't going to disappear. He wasn't going to let Victor erase him completely. Emmanuel might not remember him, but he was still that boy's father. And no amount of time or distance could change biology. Daniel hired a lawyer that same week. The man was sympathetic but honest. "This will be painful," he warned. "And expensive. Are you sure you want to fight this?" Daniel looked him in the eye. "That's my son. I'm sure." The lawyer nodded. "Then we'll need proof. Proof you sent money. Proof you maintained contact. Proof you intended to return. And we'll need a DNA test, just to establish paternity legally beyond any doubt." Daniel provided everything: bank statements, money transfer receipts, flight bookings, phone records. 7 years of evidence that he'd never abandoned his family. That he'd sacrificed everything for them. The court case took 3 months. 3 months of hell where Daniel sat across from Grace in sterile courtrooms while lawyers argued about custody and neglect and abandonment. Grace's lawyer painted Daniel as a deserter, a man who chose money over family. Daniel's lawyer presented the receipts, hundreds of thousands sent home, phone calls logged, messages saved. Victor sat beside Grace every day, holding her hand. Emmanuel never came to court, he was too young, but his shadow hung over every session. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, listened to everything with an unreadable expression. Finally, judgment day arrived. The courtroom was packed, neighbors who'd heard the story, journalists who smelled drama, curious onlookers. Daniel sat alone on his side. Grace and Victor sat together on theirs. The judge cleared her throat. "I've reviewed all the evidence," she began. "And this is a tragedy with no villains, only victims." She looked at Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, you did everything a man could do from abroad. You sent money. You called. You maintained contact as best you could. But," she turned to Grace. "Mrs. Grace, you were left alone with a toddler for 7 years. You needed support. You needed help. And Mr. Victor provided that." The judge paused. "However, the law is clear. Biology and intent matter. Mr. Daniel is Emmanuel's legal father. He never abandoned his family, he left to provide for them. Custody will be shared," the judge declared. "Emmanuel will spend weekends with his father. Both parents will make joint decisions about his education and welfare. And Mr. Victor," she fixed him with a hard stare. "You will not interfere with the father-son relationship. You may care for this child, but you are not his parent." Grace began to cry. Victor's jaw clenched. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet. But hope. A small, fragile hope. After the hearing, Daniel approached Grace outside the courthouse. She flinched when she saw him, but didn't walk away. "I don't hate you," Daniel said quietly. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you. You did what you thought you had to do." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry. But Victor was there when you weren't. He became Emmanuel's world. And now I need to become part of that world again," Daniel said. "Not to replace Victor, I can't. But to be Emmanuel's father. Because I am his father, Grace. And I've lost enough time already." Grace nodded slowly. "He's confused right now. Angry even. He doesn't understand why his life is changing." "Then help me," Daniel pleaded. "Help me show him who I am. Who I was. Why I left." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Okay." The first weekend Emmanuel came to stay with Daniel was awkward. The boy was sullen, withdrawn, clearly angry at being forced to spend time with a stranger. Daniel had rented a small apartment, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. He'd bought toys, books, games. But Emmanuel touched none of it. "Why did you leave?" the boy finally asked on Saturday night as they ate dinner in silence. Daniel had prepared his son's favorite meal, jollof rice and chicken, information he'd gotten from Joseph's wife. Emmanuel picked at it suspiciously. Daniel set down his fork. "I left because we were poor, Emmanuel. We lived in one room. We barely had food. I left so I could give you a better life." "Uncle Victor gave us a better life," Emmanuel shot back. "And he didn't have to leave." The words stung, but Daniel pushed through. "You're right. He was here. And I'm grateful he took care of you and your mother. But Emmanuel, I never stopped being your father. Not for one day." He pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. 7 years of pictures, screenshots of money transfers, photos of himself at work sites holding signs that said, "For Emmanuel," selfies taken on Emmanuel's birthdays with messages he'd sent to Grace. "Look," Daniel said, scrolling through. "Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every single month, I thought about you. I worked for you." Emmanuel stared at the screen, his young face crumpling with confusion and emotion he didn't know how to process. Over the following months, slowly, painfully slowly, things began to change. Daniel didn't try to force affection. He just showed up. Every weekend, he was there. He helped with homework. He taught Emmanuel to play chess. He told him stories about Malaysia, about the buildings he'd helped construct, about the other workers who'd also left families behind. And gradually, Emmanuel began to soften. One Sunday evening, as Daniel was dropping him back home, Emmanuel paused at the car door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Daniel asked. "For not giving up on me." Emmanuel looked at his father, really looked at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw recognition there. Not memory, but something deeper. Connection. "You're my dad," Emmanuel said, testing the words. Daniel's eyes burned with tears. "Yes. I'm your dad." Emmanuel nodded. "Okay." And he ran inside. Daniel sat in his car and cried, for the years lost, for the pain endured, for the long road still ahead. But also for this moment. This small, precious moment of reclamation. A year later, Daniel stood at Emmanuel's school play, watching his son perform on stage. Grace was there. Victor was there too. It was complicated and messy and not at all the happy ending Daniel had once dreamed of. But Emmanuel knew him now. Called him dad. Ran to him sometimes. Chose him sometimes. And that was enough. Because Daniel had learned the hardest truth of all, that love isn't about possession or perfection. It's about presence. About showing up, even when it's hard. About fighting for connection, even when it seems impossible. He'd returned from abroad to find another man raising his son. But in the end, he'd also found himself, and found a way back to the boy who'd once called a stranger father, but was learning to call Daniel a dad again. Daniel never got his fairy tale reunion. But 3 years after that court hearing, he stood watching Emmanuel graduate primary school, and when his son accepted his certificate, he looked into the crowd and waved at 2 men, Victor, who'd raised him, and Daniel, who'd returned for him. And somehow, that was enough. Because this story teaches us that love isn't measured in perfection, it's measured in persistence. In showing up when it would be easier to give up. In fighting for connection even when the world says you've already lost. Some distances can't be erased. Some time can't be recovered. But some bonds, if you're willing to fight for them, can be rebuilt. If this story moved you, hit like and share it. Tell me in the comments, what matters more, being there from the start, or coming back when it matters most. Subscribe to Stories by the King, where every truth demands to be heard and every ending brings a lesson worth remembering. This is Stories by the King, where love wins, and purpose finds its home.